I see him as a participant. He just can't move over. Is that?
No, they're trying to fix the YouTube link.
Oh, okay.
So we're waiting for that. And when that happens, we can start.
Commissioners, I just talked to Ken and Carolina. They said we're about 5 minutes out from being ready to get started. So they're working through the technical challenges.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So
I'll join the video off crowd then.
okay.
Yeah, I think that's right. Ken said when he shows up, that will be the sign that we're ready to proceed. But we're
Is he
still
here?
recording. Oh, there he is. So maybe, yeah.
Oh, there's
Ta-da.
Ken. Okay,
All right.
we're ready to go.
Oh, we are loving technology this morning. So my apologies, everyone, for the delays, but we were trying to get, we're having issues with getting our live stream going on YouTube, but I think and my apologies for the delay, but we think we have everything figured out and we're good to go.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. No stress there, huh? Well, at this time, we'll call to order the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal informal session for November 4th, 2021. And we'll begin with a flag salute. And Commissioner Berschauer, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Commissioner. We'll move on to our calendar session. Is there anything we want to add to that?
No, nothing other than the Farm Bureau dinners tonight, if anybody's going to that at 5:30.
Okay, we'll be there as well. Anything
And
else?
I have Mac Chamber dinner on my calendar for tonight as well. Okay.
Yes, right, sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just like, oh, but I will be there. Yeah.
This is the season where there will be multiple events and conflicts. And so we sort of split up and go where we can go. So, okay, we'll move on to our public comment. We don't have any public comments this morning. Ken?
I'm sorry, Chair. Before we move on from calendaring, I thought this would be a good time to also just remind, even though we have a notice on the agenda, that there's no formal session scheduled for next Thursday due to the holiday, and that was rescheduled to Tuesday, November 9th at 2 p.m. is when the board will be convening its next formal session.
I was just about to say that. Thank you, Ken.
And we have a number of other changes. There have been several. We have one on the, let's see, the 9th at 2, November 22nd at 10 a.m. And then a regular session will resume in December. Okay.
And then, Chair, I just wanted to put out that it's not on the calendar yet because obviously we can't put it on the calendar. But sometime between the 20th of December and the 30th of December, we will all be meeting with the Marion County Commissioners to appoint somebody to replace, though we cannot ever replace Representative Post.
Thank you. Yes. Commissioner Berschauer?
Did they determine that date already? I haven't seen anything come through. Okay.
I have not. I've been meaning to connect with Commissioner Cameron because I think he may be the one who's the chair.
Thank you.
Okay, we're making the rounds, visiting our fellow commissioners in neighboring counties over these appointments. So it'll be fun to visit with them. We'll go on to our work session, and that's item E, and that is reserved for topics of discussion. We're going to be talking about the ARPA funds, specifically the rural broadband and the RFI results. And Ken?
All right, and thank you. And I'm also going to have Carrie Martin join, but I'm not seeing Carrie. All right, so I'll go ahead and kick things off. Let's see. So last week, I'm sorry, I'm doing the mad dash trying to resolve our technology things today. I'm feeling a little disorganized. Last week, as you know, per the board's direction, this was a couple months ago, we opened a request for information and did a solicitation out to broadband providers to submit responsive documents to our RFI. That ran its course. We got 4 responses to that RFI, one from Illyrica, one from Online Northwest, one from Ziply Fiber, and one from Comcast. So we got the responses to the RFI. I put those together in an email. I shared that with the board. We also included copies of the responsive documents in the packet that's available to the public for today's session. And at this point, it's kind of an open discussion on what the board would like to do next. I think when you take a look at the responses, there are 4 very different responses, and some have projects or have funding requirements and elements included in the RFI. I don't know if it necessarily has enough information that is really pointing the county in a certain direction on how the board may want to proceed with some type of a grant program, and keeping in mind that the board did identify funds in our ARPA allocation, just over $1 million for rural broadband projects. And then there was a request through Senator Boquist's office for some additional funding for rural broadband projects as well. But I think when you get into some of the details of the responses to the document, you're going to see a lot of the dollar figures are much more than what the county has available to fund projects. So at this point, I just wanted to make sure that the board had an opportunity to take a look at the responses to the RFI, and staff doesn't really have a recommendation on how best to proceed. I figured the first step would be as having a discussion once you've had a chance to review the responses to the RFI, and then determine how you would like to proceed next.
Thank you for that, Ken. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's been a bit of this is a big piece, and it's also probably one of the most complex ones because it's got such far-reaching implications. So, commissioners, you've had a chance to look at them. I know looking at them gives us sort of a base coat, but I don't feel that. I mean, I personally don't feel qualified to make a recommendation based on simply on the information in each one. And I'm wondering who we're going to task with that. And I'm assuming it's going to be people who are in the industry, and yet we've got to maintain some kind of neutrality. So we want to know just what the information is. I think everybody came at it with an entirely different perspective. And some providers have been working on this sort of aspirationally for a number of years, and are bringing us what their best guess is at this point. So, commissioners.
And Chair, apologies, my internet is not super stable right now, so I may be doing some switching. But thank you for bringing getting us started. I would say that I want to make sure that whatever we're funding meets the federal government's definition of the high-speed internet, right? So that's, I guess that's one of them, is that some of the projects and proposals aren't going to get us there. And then two, I want to make sure that we're not doing any overlap with the work of Online Northwest. They're the proposal that we funded previously. So I think those are the two things that are most important, but then making sure that we're actually getting out to communities that don't have any internet is, to me, I feel like an important part of that, or the ones that I know that there's some folks who struggle with really expensive satellite internet. So if we can even just have some of those be some of our focus. And then I would be open to the more formal request for proposals process going forward. I realize that gives us another step that we have to go through, but I think it would be good, given that we have 4 entities of varying scales and varying experience in our community. It gives all of them a chance to say, here's what I can do for this speed, and here's where I know that there are gaps and where people are just in satellite land.
Okay, great. Yeah, I agree with that. I think if we do get information, and then we have questions about it for specific proposals, that we are able to go back and to talk to these folks about that, because I think that's important as well. So Commissioner Berschauer, thoughts?
Chair Starrett, I would agree that I don't feel like I'm qualified to know really the differences between. So I'm curious what you would propose in terms of who would be the deciding, if we set up a committee or whatever it is to decide that. Some of the numbers were pretty shocking in terms of the outside subsidy that would be needed. $50 to $100 million to cover fiber deployment. So I think I would like to be more focused as to what we actually want to accomplish and make sure we do that function completely, if that makes sense. So we're not spreading it too thin. And then nobody really has an improvement where we need it. So those were kind of my thoughts. This is a much bigger project and problem than we probably have funds for. So I want, whatever we do, I just want to do it well.
Right, I appreciate that. And the other thing is if you look at, for instance, what Polk County did, and they're just miles ahead of us in terms of phase 1 and phase 2, that type of thing. And we're beginning from the basics. And we also have to acknowledge that there are parts of the county that will likely not be able to be served in this capacity. So I think that that we need to remember that we're not going to do this all in one project. We just don't have the funds for it. But if we can look at what we have asked them to do, as far as where can you cover that has absolutely no service at all, and that gets us the base code. And then, of course, in the phase 2 and phase 3, we can look at upping the quality, upping the speed, and then increasing the number of locations. So those are my thoughts. Commissioner Kula.
Yeah, and thank you, Chair. I wonder, since we have approximately 3 million between what we've set aside and what's coming from BOC, I wonder if it even makes sense to do in the request for proposals that we will entertain, or a way of doing it would be we will entertain proposals that will, for $1 million of ours, requiring a $1 million match of either, their time, their labor, their equipment, for these specific areas of the county that we've now identified as lacking in service. And it sure seems like, as you alluded to, that there's a lot more that has to happen going forward. If we're committed to expanding people's access to the internet in our community, clearly each of these companies on their own is, I don't want to say never going to get there, but I think realistically, looking at the numbers and how quickly or not quickly they're moving on their own, I would entertain a discussion at some point about what that looks like to have an ongoing level of support for that basic infrastructure. of saying, okay, this is, we value having towers in these areas, or we value moving some communities to fiber. So I just want to put that out there, but then having shrinking it down to like, hey, we have this amount of money. What can you do for this in a proposal with $1 million, with $1 million in match or whatever?
So just to clarify, are you saying that the providers should come up with $1 million in match of services or materials?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Because if if we are granting them money, they need to have this either be part of a plan that they're simply accelerating, or a recognition that they really want this for their business model, and that they know that it's going to work for their business model. Because I don't want us to be granting money to somebody to have them put in a $200 a month internet that's marginally okay, that they're never going to be happy with as the provider, because it's not just about whether somebody can afford it and it's decent. It's also whether the business wants to continue doing it. So from my perspective, I don't think we should be investing with businesses if it's not going to work for them to continue doing it, providing that service.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I wonder how. Yeah, and I think without an RFP, we're really not going to be able to go to the next step unless we have something concrete. Because this is a nice beginning, but I don't think it gets us to the next step.
So, Chair, maybe you didn't come to this conclusion, but I read a couple of notes in these proposals that seem to imply that the supply chain is an issue. So if we're talking about fiber, we might be pushing this out several years in terms of the companies being able to have the product they need to do it. Is that a concern for spending the money and actually implementing this in terms of our timeline? Maybe that's a Ken question, but.
Good question. Ken?
I mean, I would say it's a concern because I want us to be acting on this in a
Right.
in a relatively short time frame. And I realize that is also a question for Ken in terms of the Treasury guidance.
Well, and the other thing is that will they know? In other words, will the providers, they might have their ear to the ground basically on what's happening supply chain wise, but are they going to be able to make any hard and fast guarantees if some of this stuff is completely out of their control? So Ken, I don't know where we go with that.
That's a good question, and my apologies, but we're continuing to have technical issues with our live stream on YouTube, so it's going to be a heck of a morning. So talking about technology while dealing with technology at the same time. I think, and my apologies if I was distracted and if I'm kind of missing some questions. I was hearing the questions around the timeline and how we want to roll this out, and then whether or not, potential projects could fit within the Treasury guidance with the timelines. I think that's going to be a challenge, moving forward, because I don't know how many of these projects or how many of the providers have shovel-ready projects, or what we're funding, or how we're proceeding with this. Because we're already, we're having similar discussions with the grant that was awarded last year as part of CARES Act, and some of the discussions that and some of the challenges that Online Northwest has been having with some of the timelines and some of the questions that they're having under that grant that we're currently having discussions with them about. As far as a recommendation and next steps, I think it might require, just based on some of the discussion and some of the feedback and some of the ideas, that maybe Carrie and I may need to take a step back, and we may need to schedule, and maybe flush out some recommendations that we could bring forward for the board to look at, because again, I think I'm hearing a couple different ideas and some of the things that I've had floated around in the back of my mind as possible options. you could either do smaller grant awards to all the providers to make an investment on projects that they may have in the works, or do a solicitation and then try to pick whoever has the most competitive project that's going to meet the benchmarks and deliverables that the board would like to see, in expanding coverage to rural areas that currently have limited to no coverage. Because there's going to be challenges with timelines, but then there's also going to be challenges when it comes to broadband with the Treasury guidance about the upload and download speeds and the requirements associated with that. Based on, and they were pretty specific in the Treasury guidelines on that baseline, that what they define as a expansion of rural broadband. And I don't know if we would necessarily be able to fund like a step one in a project that meets upload or download speeds that are below that threshold and still remain compliant with the Treasury guidelines. So again, I think of all the categories and discussions that we're having with the ARPA funds, I think this one has proven to be one of the more challenging ones. Number one, we don't have a broadband office, so I don't necessarily, we don't have expertise on staff to really provide a recommendation on which is the best direction to go. And then also, if we do a solicitation or a recruitment, who needs to be on a committee to do those review and provide that recommendation, without actually getting a lot of the same broadband providers that may be applying for this, that may have different thoughts on how best to approach this. Carrie, did you have anything else you wanted to add that I may have missed, or?
Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to Ken's comment about we don't have an office of broadband, and well, I recognize that it's not easy right now to hire anybody. With the million that we've set aside and the 1.9 million that's coming through Senator Boquist's allocation, I wonder whether that might be valuable in the long term, is to, or even just in the term of the American Rescue Plan, is to look for somebody who has that knowledge. And I know that Business Oregon, for example, they work with people on this. USDA works with people on this, because if we're committed, which clearly, Chair Starrett and I set aside the 500,000 last year. And Commissioner Bershauer, obviously we've talked about this a lot, whether it might actually make sense to set aside and say, we actually want to have somebody doing this work within the county or on a contract, maybe even through SEDCOR, in order to look for those funds that are from Business Oregon and from the Office of Broadband and from USDA, so that we can bring money into the county to tackle what's obviously a large dollar figure.
Thank you. I agree. And I know we've talked earlier, at least sort of high level, Ken, about using any of these funds administratively and what the guidelines were about that, because this is one area where, we can look at our local, our CBOs, our nonprofits, and we know, because we work with them closely, what it is, what their scope of work is, what their track record is, and what makes sense to fund. But this is something that we don't have. So could we, number one, I believe you said that that some of this could be administrative funds could be allocated for these types of allocations. The other thing is that you're right. I don't know who we would possibly get who'd be on some kind of an advisory board who wouldn't have ties, who wouldn't have biases toward one particular provider. And that's going to be a real tough one. So given that we don't have a rural broadband office, if we had a contract with somebody who could give us a little more information and then do an RFP at the same time that they review.
In hearing that, because I think one of the thoughts that kind of comes to mind is, because if I remember correctly, I can't remember if it was Polk County or if it was Marion County, one of our adjoining counties, I believe at some point, at least commissioned some type of hired a consultant and did a plan, or did something along those lines that would essentially kind of accomplish that, getting the expertise and maybe even putting together a plan. I think that would be an allowable use of the ARPA funds and may help, you know, because then if we had someone that was working with all of the area providers or doing that and kind of putting together a plan and consolidating the data, because there's all this data at USDA and all these other things, but you know, do we have for Yamhill County, you know, coverage maps, identified areas where those gaps are, where there's the most need, looking at, you know, where there's both the need and the ability to easily expand into areas versus where there's, you know, limited demand because maybe there's not a lot of residences in that area, then there's not really a huge need to necessarily be expanding, you know, fiber up into the hills necessarily to a large degree. But I'm wondering if that would be a means to kind of resolve this, because I don't really see it as an administrative function if we're trying to address rural broadband and we need to develop a plan and figure out a means to get funds to providers to expand that service. I don't really see that as an administrative function. I see that part of, that's a project specifically related to rural broadband, if that makes sense, you know. So I think it would be an allowable use of the funds, but I also recognize that if we're going to use a portion of that and eventually award for specific projects, we could run into further timeline issues depending on how long it takes to go through a process to onboard a consultant, put together a plan, and then try to award projects later on. You know, there could be some timeline issues running into that, just knowing that the time that it takes. You know, I'm thinking of examples like our transit plan or a parks master plan, or some of these other, you know, planning efforts that we've done in other areas of the county can take some time to pull together and do. So
Thanks, Ken. So if we look at this as we have with CIRA and in terms of a space needs analysis, there's the first part of that, and then there's the you know, the execution of that. And this is years in the making. So you're right. We have a timeline, we have a deadline. And if we were to contract it out and have somebody come up, because I know some providers have actually done some of the work on their own, taken the initiative to do a lot of the mapping, so we wouldn't be charged with that for that. And we also just have to, we're probably going to have to limit it because it's not really a lot of money in terms of what we'd like to do countywide. So if we were to say time-wise and what you're able to do, but we do need we do need somebody to, I would think, to oversee this in terms of going forward, because this isn't going to be the last iteration of trying to get broadband done. Commissioner Bershauer?
Thank you, Chair. I guess I see it as, you know, there's two options. We could expand wireless, or we could invest in fiber. And unfortunately, with the amount of money we have, our investment in fiber would just be a drop in the bucket. And it's going to take decades to get Yamhill County covered with that. I mean, the state was trying to do that, and essentially anytime they had a road improvement project, they were trying to get to the point where they could lay fiber, you know, and save on costs. I just don't, you know, if I was looking at the Illyrica one, if, you know, $2 million gets us 80% covered with wireless, or 4 million gets us 90% covered with wireless, to me, those are real tangible numbers. That's a positive investment, even if wireless might be, you know, the technology of now and fiber is the future. I just worry that we're way into the future in terms of investment in fiber. So And I think the wireless, for me, it's and I don't, Chair, you have kind of spotty wireless service where you live. I don't know about Commissioner Kula if you do, but in my opinion, it's more of a public safety thing too. And the investments, if we make the investments, I believe it would also help, you know, our public safety groups in terms of their capabilities as well. So if we're looking to make an immediate impact, that's where I'm kind of leaning is, you know, let's expand the wireless and make sure that people, up to 90% of folks in our county have solid wireless service. I see the fiber as, you know, kind of a drop in the bucket, and how far are you really going to get in terms of service levels or expansion with, you know, $3 million. But I would also say in terms of the plan, I would expect whoever we award a contract to or grant to do that work. I would expect them to know, you know, if we give you $3 million to go, you know, make sure that Yamhill County has 90% coverage of wireless, then you're going to know where you need to put that, right? So that's kind of where I'm leaning on this.
Thank you. I think that we can't get perhaps the Cadillac, and we can't get the best possible connection, but we can get something for everybody. So that seems to be, you know, because all of us who live in rural areas, you know, I've got satellite, I've got wireless, and it's not optimal, but you know, we do what we can. It's not going to be perhaps the best, but Commissioner Kula.
I just know that Christian has his hand. I will, yeah, he has his hand raised. Look at that.
He learned a new trick.
So exciting. We can all learn things. I do want to note that based upon my understanding of the rollout in Polk County, at least their wireless contractor and provider, they're at, I think, less than 12%, and they promised 90% with $2 million. So I'm not confident that what we're seeing in the RFI is actually what we're going to see going forward. So just put that caution out there.
Do you mean a 12% an expansion of coverage? Like
yes,
they were trying to get.
Alyrica, so the wireless provider said that they would get 90% of folks who didn't have internet, at least that base, whatever it's 100/200, with $2 million in the last, you know, phase, the first phase for them. My understanding is that 12% of folks who previously, based upon a survey that the county put out, 12% of households from the 1 year to the next year now have internet that didn't have it, but that's not actually just new Alyrica customers, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay.
And the county did a survey early on before the projects began. I don't know that, well, first of all, I don't know that we would, that's another expense, and I don't know that we have to, because some of these providers have actually done some of that basic mapping already and have an idea and have been able to incorporate that into their proposals, or at least the RFIs that we have at this point. Ken? I'm sorry, Christian, you've got your hand up.
Well, I just wanted to point out that there may be a method under our procurement and under the procurement statutes to engage the assistance of one of the entities that might also be a bidder on the RFP, provided that from the assistance we get, there isn't an appearance that it would be unfair or would give them a competitive advantage in whatever the final RFP looked like. So for example, the easiest example I can think of is if we were to work with an entity in the industry, we're looking to buy a bunch of new road building equipment, and we worked with someone in the industry to help us determine what road equipment we needed. And one of the ultimate specifications in the RFP for the road equipment was that all the road equipment needed to be green and yellow. That would be clearly something that would be seen as advantageous for John Deere. and only John Deere equipment would satisfy that requirement. So we can engage with experts in the community, provided that the RFP, when it's ultimately issued, is issued broadly and doesn't have specifications that would only allow the contractor we worked with to meet the requirements, essentially. That can be, we have to be cognizant of those limits and strike that right balance, but we might be able to engage with one of these local experts to help us determine what exactly we would like the RFP to look like. So I'm not sure how to turn my hand off.
Good.
Oh, here, lower hand.
Look at that. Look at us.
Wow.
Look at what we're learning week by week.
Someday we'll be in person.
Yeah, I know. So, so we've determined that we're probably looking at needing some expert advice in terms of the industry and contracting out perhaps somebody who could oversee this and give us more details on coming to those determinations when we do get the RFPs. And I guess the next question is, who do we task with doing that instead of putting together like what we've done with EDAC, putting together a committee ourselves, that we actually contract someone out to do the broader work of this. Commissioner Kula?
Thank you, Chair. I realized that I tried to clarify the numbers from Polk County, but I didn't take the next step of agreeing with Commissioner Bershauer, which is I meant to agree that I think that realistically the technology of today is what we're going to be getting, you know, the wireless signals, especially for these areas that, again, we're unlikely to ever on our own, barring some larger federal or state program, running fiber, you know, up a road to 2 households for a mile or whatever. That's just, it's unrealistic. I do note that it would be good to hear from an expert who's putting together like a plan. It would be good to hear from them about things like the Starlink, right? Which is the, you know, new and approved satellite. I have hesitations about it because I think it's valuable for us to be investing in our own community. But if that's something where if the consultant or the planner or this knowledgeable person says that's a service that's really going to go, that's the future of it beyond fiber, then I want to hear that before we invest in infrastructure that's maybe just going to be obsolete. But again, Commissioner Bershauer's comment about first responders and that communication is still something that I think we should keep in mind. So sorry to muddy the waters with it, but I think it's good for us to be thinking about all of that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Bershauer.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know, I can't remember, Commissioner Kula, if you were on Merkley's, it was either Merkley or Bonamici that did a broadband summit or something. It was several months ago, but I was on there for a while and it was pretty clear that the industry experts were really focused on fiber. I mean, it was repetitive, like fiber's the future, fiber's the future. So I don't know how much good that's going to do us if we, you know, if we pull in somebody like that who's just going to tell us fiber's the future. I don't know. I almost feel like we just need to set a goal or an expectation. If we know realistically we're investing in wireless because that's what we have, you know, let's set a goal. We want 90% of Yamhill County to be covered, and then maybe that's what comes across in the RFP to say, all right, how do you make that happen and what's the cost?
I agree with that. I also think the track records of the different providers is important, because we hear anecdotally when you hear people, let's say they're not happy with service for this provider or that provider. Want to make sure that we're taking that into consideration. Customer satisfaction, what have they been able to deliver? How much is it costing? All of those have to come into play before we get something set in motion, and then we wind up having customers that are thinking, well, what good is this? This didn't really get me where I needed to be. So that's, again, I think it's out of our wheelhouse to determine as a board, but I would love to take the next step to get somebody that we do a request for a proposal, or we start to look in terms of a contract so that we can move towards procurement.
I have a couple of questions, but I want to make sure that Ken gets his thoughts.
Why don't you go ahead, Commissioner?
Go ahead.
Okay, so one of them is for Ken anyway. So Ken, there was some concern, I believe, that the money coming from Senator Boquist in the state wasn't guaranteed. My understanding is that it was, but did you want to speak to that, or can you?
I don't know. I don't necessarily have the details on that funding. But it sounds like, you know, I don't want to speak out of turn. I don't know the status of it. I haven't seen anything directly from Senator Boquist's office that's come to me about the funding. So I can speak to the ARPA funds because I'm directly involved with managing those and the agreement for those. And I haven't seen an agreement, or I'm not even sure how we would access those funds if they're looking at, if we're going to get a direct allocation, if it's reimbursement. I'm not sure the mechanics of that to even speak to it.
Senator Boquist's office, I had asked him recently about that. He said the funds are with DAS. So basically, we were talking earlier on about the time estimate, and it went anywhere from October to January. So I don't know that they're in jeopardy or that they're in question. I think it's just a question of sort of getting the check and when that money will be dispersed. But my understanding is it's with the state, and we would need to just wait for that allocation, or at least nudge them a little with a contact. But I don't think they're in jeopardy.
Okay, that was my understanding too, Chair. So I just mostly wanted to give Ken some certainty that it was probably going to, or that it was going to come at some point.
Well, yeah, no, I was just going to say, according to Senator Boquist, he said, but he did put in this little note in the email, and you might have better luck at getting the money out than I do. So I thought, well, we'll just, we'll take that under advisement. Anyway, Commissioner, go ahead.
Oh yeah, that sounds good. And I do know Chehalen Valley Chamber of Commerce actually is joining forces, I think, with Kaiser Chamber and Wilsonville Chamber. Altogether, they're getting $800,000 that they just learned about through Senator Thatcher's allocation. So I know that it's a similar deal. I know that it's moving forward for them. So I'm anticipating this is going to move forward for us. Okay, so the second question then, which is really one for Ken, but if colleagues, if you know an answer to, is I know that Business Oregon is pretty regularly working with jurisdictions and even businesses, right? Because that's what they do on broadband internet connections. Would it be, apologies that I haven't done this yet, but would it be worth a phone call to somebody like Arthur Chop, who's the region's infrastructure financer for Business Oregon, before we move forward with seeking counsel outside of that?
And COG.
Yes, right, COG too. I'm just wondering whether they might, COG or Business Oregon might actually have somebody on staff that we can contact.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. And we could also see if our contract allows for us to get some of this consult from COG, if you think about it, or might help.
Yeah, and the only thing that I was going to add is based on the discussion and reviewing the, like I kind of anticipated that, to a certain degree, because even I had when I was reading the responses to the RFI, it was like, well, there's not really a clear path on next steps or where we go from here. But with the number of the questions, and I think the commissioners made, many good points, but one of the questions that's out there, because I know that there's been several ARPA allocations to the state, and then there's Business Oregon, and then there's grants, and then I know the state has also had discussions, and USDA. There's all these buckets of funds that are out there as well. And I think if any planning effort that was that we'd be going through, I think would put us in a much better position to also identify those resources. So then our ARPA allocation and those other funds that knowing that they're big ticket items, but being able to leverage those funds to then secure additional funds to get projects on the ground happening. So I see that as another component to reaching out and kind of developing a plan, and whoever we engage with to help assist with that. I think the various funding mechanism, because I think there's a lot, and I get it that broadband is a challenge because you have different aspects to it, but then ultimately I think the other part, that when you have a company that you're giving funds, ultimately you have to have customers that then connect to the service and utilize the service to sustain it. Otherwise you end up with fiber that's buried out in a right of way and nobody's connected to it. So that's the other part of the challenge too, is making sure that it's feasible and it's a service that people are looking to connect into, is another important aspect. So based on all the questions and the discussions that we had today, I think it gives Carrie and I some direction that we can take a step back, reach out to COG, Business Oregon, also reach out to Polk County, our contacts there, and some of the efforts that they had done leading up to this. And then we could come back and with some better recommendations on how the board might want to proceed.
That makes sense. Commissioners, anything else? So it looks like there's a plan forward for the next step. Okay. Thank you. Ken.
And I was just going to ask before, because we're still having technical issues. I don't know if our YouTube stream is working. So I was going to ask before we move to the next agenda item, if we could recess for 5 minutes so I could check in with Carolina and see if we can get that resolved before we continue the rest of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. So we'll recess for 5 minutes and then come back. Thank you.